In 1954, the comic book industry was under assault. Critics claimed that comic books had turned the youth of America into lawless, heartless, sadistic, cruel, sexual deviant monsters. Of all the characters they attacked, one superheroine drew the most ire. She was the Phantom Lady. Hi everyone, as every YouTuber who does a lot of video editing will tell you, it's 1% inspiration and 99% coffee. If you like the content of my channel, you can show your appreciation by buying me a cup of coffee. You can do so by using the PayPal link in the description box. If you're feeling a little less altruistic and you want something in return, you can also support the channel by checking out the FizzFop Teespring store. Most of the designs are based on comic book and pulp magazines, but there's all sorts of other designs there to float your boat. Please check it out. The link is also in the description box. Now, back to our regularly scheduled program. "10 months before Superman flew out of the pages of Action Comics, Olga Mesmer, the girl with the X-ray eyes, appeared in a pulp magazine called Spicy Mystery Stories. She used her super strength and other powers to fight evil, and many historians consider her to be the first superpowered heroine. In 1940, Fletcher Hanks created the first post-Superman heroine for comic books, Phantoma. She defended her territory in the pages of Jungle Comics. It wasn't long before superheroines became a regular feature in comic books, and a select few managed to be featured on the covers. However, the majority were left to the back pages. This was the initial fate for the Phantom Lady. Unfortunately for her, she made her debut in the first issue of Police Comics. This book was also the first appearance of Jack Cole's classic creation, Plastic Man, and Plastic Man quickly knocked out Reed Crandall's incredibly drawn Firebrand for the cover position. Then the title picked up Will Eisner's spirit. Between the two dominating characters, they suffocated any chance for the Phantom Lady or other characters to gain attention from readers. Police Comics was published by Quality Comics, and Quality was a comic book line that used a variety of in-house, freelance, and studio-for-hire strips. For example, Plastic Man was the creation of in-house artist Jack Cole, and in contrast, the Phantom Lady, like the Spirit, came from the Eisner-Iger studio. Eisner and Iger supplied strips to several publishers, and she was the creation of studio artist Arthur Petty. There is no writing credits on these stories, but it's generally believed that Will Eisner had a helping hand in guiding the writing. No origin is given, but the Phantom Lady's alter ego is Sandra Knight, the debutante daughter of a U.S. senator. Washington, D.C. is the backdrop for most of her stories, and often these stories involve government intrigue of some sort. She is super athletic, knows martial arts, and carries around a compact-shaped flashlight. When opened, it fires out a blackout beam that leaves the bad guys blind. Phantom Lady had a 23-issue run in Police Comics and a very brief run in another Quality title, Feature Comics. During her Quality Comics run, a number of artists drew her stories. The most notable was a 15-year-old named Joe Kubert. By age 15, Kubert was a veteran comic book artist whose artwork had been printed by several publishers. The Phantom Lady's controversial period began when Fox Features Syndicate came out of bankruptcy in the mid-1940s. Creditors and the War Production Board had almost forced Fox out of business. Owner and shady businessman Victor Fox had worked out a deal to keep his line afloat. His top superhero, the Blue Beetle, continued publication through Holyoke Publishing, with most of the profits going to pay off Fox's creditors. The Fox line stayed afloat by publishing jungle, gangster, and romance titles. The sleazier, the better. This approach reinvigorated Fox, and profits from these books were used to regain ownership of the Blue Beetle and continue Victor Fox's dreams of being the king of comics. Fox went to the Eisner-Iger studio for help, and by this time, Will Eisner had left the studio, leaving Iger as the sole proprietor, which was fine with Victor Fox. Eisner and Fox did not get along due to a feud going back to 1940 involving the Wonder Man copyright infringement lawsuit. Fox told Iger that he wanted a superheroine who was super sexy, and Iger knew exactly what Fox wanted and sold him on the idea of reviving the Phantom Lady. At this point in time, Iger believed that he owned the character after the cancellation at Quality Comics. Iger gave the assignment to one of his most talented artists, Matt Baker. At this time, Matt Baker was one of the few African-American artists working in comics. He had traveled around the U.S. and lived in Washington, D.C., Pittsburgh, and Baltimore before coming to New York City to study art. Baker had worked quietly and often uncredited, like many artists in the Eisner-Iger studio, since 1944. He had gotten his start in Jungle comics, drawing scantily clad jungle goddesses. And Iger knew from the start that Baker was his man who could deliver what Fox wanted, and Baker was allowed to cut loose. Baker redesigned the character. He modeled her looks after actress Linda Darnell. Next, he gave her a new skimpy blue costume, and his artwork exploded like an A-bomb off the page. The relaunch series picked up where the original series ended, with Sandra Knight being based out of Washington, D.C. Her father, the senator, continued being a major character in these stories, but also added as sort of a romantic interest / comedic sidekick named Don. He's introduced as Sandra Knight's fiancé. He's good looking, but he's a bit of a bumbler, and he's often a damsel in distress being rescued by the Phantom Lady. In the comic books, the name Gregory Page is given writer's credit for these stories, but as it turns out, Gregory Page did not exist. This was actually the pen name of Iger studio editor Ruth Roche. Together, Baker and Roche took the Phantom Lady into a shocking direction. These new Fox stories went to an extreme in 1940s unwholesomeness. In addition to the overt sexuality of the Phantom Lady, there was plenty more, covertly hidden through art and subtext. Every issue was packed with some form of deviancy. Foot fetishes, domination, bondage, misogyny, cross-dressing, sadomasochism. It was all the sleaze a 10-year-old could handle for a dime. These kind of stories didn't go unnoticed by adults. Starting in 1948, comic book sex and violence came to the forefront with articles and investigations from national magazines. Dr. Frederick Wortham, who had been studying the effects of comic books on children since the early 1940s, jumped out as the leading critic of the industry. However, in 1952, the Fox line of comics ceased publication. Victor Fox had been forced into a final bankruptcy that he could not recover from. His creditors jumped on his assets, and ownership of the Phantom Lady ended up in the hands of his former business partner, Robert Farrell. Farrell started up his own comic line under the imprint Ajax Publishing. Other artists, not Matt Baker, drew these new stories, and they were heavily toned down, but this did not stop the outrage and criticism. In 1954, Wortham published a book based on his 10 years of research on comic books and the negative influence they had on children. It was called Seduction of the Innocent. In this book, he made numerous claims on how harmful superheroes were on the mental development of children. The Phantom Lady was one of his favorite targets, even using one Phantom Lady cover to illustrate a single page of his book as an example of overt sexuality with the caption, "Sexual stimulation by combining headlights with the sadist dream of tying up women." Seduction of the Innocent became a bestseller, and it stoked the fire which ended up with the rounding up and burning of comic books. The U.S. Congress began holding hearings into the matter, with Dr. Wortham giving testimony. The Comics Code Authority came into being to regulate the morality in comic books, and even though Ajax Publishing had dramatically toned down the Phantom Lady, the damage was done, and Ajax was one of the companies that was forced out of business. After that, the world moved on, and the Phantom Lady lay dormant for over 15 years. With the approach of America's bicentennial in 1976, DC Comics decided to revive its numerous World War II-era properties. In 1956, DC Comics had bought out Quality Comics, who originally published the Phantom Lady back in 1941. They continued publishing Quality's Plastic Man and Blackhawk, but the rest of the line had fallen by the wayside. DC revived these forgotten Quality superheroes as a superhero team called the Freedom Fighters, and the Phantom Lady was right there among them. Around this same time period, Bill Black's Paragon Press began publishing the Fox Ajax version of The Phantom Lady in the pages of Femme Fantastique. DC Comics was under the understanding that they owned all of the quality superheroes, and Black was under the assumption that since she was part of the Fox Ajax lines, that meant the Phantom Lady was in public domain, and this situation led to the threat of a lawsuit. Before the situation escalated to court, a deal was worked out. Black would not challenge DC's ownership, and in return, he was allowed to reprint the Fox Ajax stories, which he did under his new Americomics or AC Comics line. DC considered these stories as unauthorized use by Fox and Ajax in the 1940s and 50s, and would not include them as part of any Phantom Lady canon. Also part of the deal, Black was not allowed to create any new Phantom Lady stories. Necessity is the mother of invention, and Bill Black still wanted to do the Phantom Lady. So he created his own. Night Vale began as a modern mystical mashup between the Phantom Lady and Doctor Strange. The twist backstory behind Night Vale is that she began in the 1940s as a different superhero called the Blue Bulleteer, and her adventures in the late 1940s led to her becoming the modern era Night Vale. The Blue Bulleteer's revealing outfit was heavily inspired by Matt Baker's Phantom Lady design. This storyline also gave Bill Black's AC Comics the opportunity to publish both Night Vale and Blue Bulleteer stories. Phantom Lady-inspired heroines did not end with AC Comics. Alan Moore based his iconic graphic novel The Watchmen on characters from the defunct Charlton and Gold Key lines. Moore did not like Charlton's Nightshade. He thought she was a very weak character. Instead, he looked towards the Phantom Lady for inspiration, and from there he created the Silk Spectre. Currently, the Phantom Lady remains part of the DC universe. She's evolved since her return in the 1970s, and one series even had her team up with another quality hero, the Doll Man. Artist Matt Baker was one of the first African-American artists working in comic books. After the Phantom Lady, Baker moved around the comic book industry, eventually landing at pre-Marvel Atlas Comics where he drew romance and western titles. He was described by many as a stylish bachelor, which you can read into however you want. He was also described as a heavy chain smoker. Chain smoking and a heart condition created by rheumatic fever as a child led to her early demise at the age of 39. Years later, comic book collectors would describe his sexualized art style as good girl art. His work on the Phantom Lady is considered the best example of this genre. And Baker's artwork continues to be in huge demand from Golden Age enthusiasts. Joe Kubert, the 15-year-old who drew the Phantom Lady for Quality Comics, had a historic career in the industry. He began working in comic books at age 11, and by 1942 he had been published by MLJ, Fox, and Quality Comics. Around the time he was drawing the Phantom Lady, he began doing colors for the Sunday comic supplements of Will Eisner's Spirit. Shortly after his work on the Phantom Lady, he was hired by DC Comics and became the noted artist of Hawkman. In the 1950s, he became the managing editor of St. John Publications, and there he had a great deal of success and helped produce the first 3D comics. As a freelance artist, he drifted from publisher to publisher. He drew science fiction for Avon and war stories for EC. The Comics Code Authority put numerous publishers out of business in the mid-1950s, but Kubert continued to find steady work at DC and Atlas. In 1956, he was part of the team that relaunched The Flash for issue number 4 of Showcase Comics. This is really important because this relaunch was the start of the Silver Age of comics. In 1961, he drew the relaunch of Hawkman, but Kubert wasn't only tied to superheroes. He became synonymous with DC's war titles, and Kubert's renditions of Sergeant Rock and the Unknown Soldier are legendary. Kubert went on to become DC's Director of Publications in 1967. And 10 years later, he branched off and started the Joe Kubert School of Cartoon and Graphic Art. It became the premier art school for training artists in the medium of cartooning and sequential art storytelling. Kubert's last artwork appeared in 2012. Before Watchmen Night Owl was a prequel to Alan Moore's Watchmen graphic novel, which was published back in the 1980s. He drew this 4-part story with his son Andy. The 3rd and 4th parts were published posthumously. Hi everyone, FizzFop here, and I hope you really enjoyed this Redux version of my Phantom Lady video. A lot of artists, both pro and amateur, love the Phantom Lady and have drawn her with care and devotion over the years. And I'm going to show you some of the fan art while I wrap this video up. I'm going to start off with Dave Stevens, of course. Love his stuff. Anyway, the Phantom Lady sort of has a cult following, and the fan art is sort of a reflection of this. I did this video for 2 reasons. First, it was a good time to remake this video because I'm working on a series of videos about Fox Features Syndicate and the publisher Victor Fox. And I've been working on these videos, and I thought with when I start putting these out, there will be renewed interest into the Phantom Lady. And this renewed interest leads into my second reason. I felt that I did a horrible job on the video the first time around. I was learning how to edit audio, and I didn't know what I was doing, and I really screwed up. I made it in 2-channel stereo, which sounded great on my computer, but most people's devices are set on single-channel mono, and so what would happen would be people would get either the narration track or the track with the background music or sound effects, and I was always getting messages saying, I can't hear it, and stuff. So it was my bad. I didn't know what I was doing. I didn't know how to fix it without starting over from scratch, and later, it took a while, but I sort of knew what I did wrong in that, and I sort of figured it out, and pieced it together and stuff. And my apologies if you couldn't hear it the first time around. I need to redo a lot of my earlier videos. There's all sorts of things wrong with them, like a wrong photograph of somebody identified wrong, or maybe even some small bit of information was wrong or something. Sometimes I even wrote, like in my notes, had it written right, but then when I was writing my script, I would still put it in wrong, and and people, you know, because people are passionate about their superheroes and the subject matter and the content, people who are really into it spot those, and they'll call you out on it every time, and I'm always like, oh, I can't believe I missed that. But anyway, I watch the old videos now and I just cringe completely just because I didn't know how to write. I didn't know how to do my voiceovers. I had a horrible microphone. I've got a much better one now and stuff. So I've sort of gotten my act together. So I'm going to redo some of the more older ones. Anyway, I appreciate you watching this video, and I hope you enjoyed it. If you did enjoy the video and you want to help out the channel, you can do so by checking out my Teespring store. I've added 2 Phantom Lady shirts based on Matt Baker covers. And if you don't want a t-shirt, but you do want to support the channel in some small way, you can do so by buying me a cup of coffee or a beer through PayPal. The links are in the description box. Coffee and beer is always appreciated. That's about it for me. I should have some more videos coming out soon. I think you'll really get a kick out of some of the stuff I've got coming up with Victor Fox and the Fox Features Syndicate videos. So keep a lookout for those. So until next time, stay super. Bye.